All right, so we're going to go ahead and get started with autonomic nervous system today. So we're going to talk about autonomics, parasympathetic, sympathetic, different neurotransmitters, and then end up with talking about a little bit about consciousness and some neurotransmitters, age-related issues as well. Okay, so we're going to talk about autonomics. So this is your automatic nervous system. Okay, this happens without conscious awareness. Okay, this is how your body maintains uh, homeostasis, so how it responds to the external environment to make sure that you maintain an internal steady state. Okay, and we don't have conscious control over this. There's a lot of different reflexes involved to keep to affect your smooth muscle, your glands, your cardiac muscle, adipocytes, different things like that will be affected to maintain homeostasis. We're going to talk about the two branches, the sympathetic and parasympathetic as well. So we have autonomic nervous system and then somatic nervous system. Somatic nervous system is conscious control of your skeletal muscles. Okay, autonomics is that unconscious control. Okay, so we have motor neurons that come from the central nervous system, from the brainstem and spinal cord, and then we have, those are preganglionic fibers. Okay, so the preganglionic neurons. The fibers are actually the axons of those preganglionic neurons. Okay, so we have preganglionic neurons in the central nervous system, and then we have postganglionic neurons that is in the peripheral. Okay, and again, the fibers, when we talk about postganglionic fibers, we're talking about the bundled axons from the postganglionic neurons, or the preganglionic fibers, or the preganglionic axons. So we're going to look into the two divisions now. So we have sympathetic division. Sympathetic division, this is your fight or flight. So this is when you're, running from a tiger, or trying to fight over the last toilet paper in the store. Your sympathetics kick in. Okay, so you have heightened mental awareness, you have increased metabolic rate, decreased digestion. Okay, you need to shunt blood to your muscles. You need to have blood in your brain, so you're alert and you're functioning. You don't need to be digesting food while you're in a fight. Okay, so you decrease digestive function, decrease blood flow to your digestion. You activate energy reserves, you increase respiratory rate, dilation of respiratory passageways, so you breathe in more oxygen, and you increase your heart rate and blood pressure to get that oxygen throughout your body. Okay. And then you also activate the sweat glands as well. So that's, like, you can imagine when you're in a fight, like all of these things actively occurring. Okay? Your muscles, you get blood flow to your muscles because they're working hard. You increase your breathing, you increase your heart rate, you start to sweat, that kind of stuff. That all happens with sympathetics, that fight or flight. Okay, and it's supposed to happen in times of emergency. Your body's supposed to deal with the emergency, activate all these things to help you deal with the emergency, and then shut it down when the emergency is done. Okay, you're not meant to live in this like sympathetic state. Okay, you don't function well there. So where you're supposed to stay most of the time is parasympathetic. Okay, so parasympathetic is rest and digest. So the body basically relaxes here. We have decreased metabolic rates, we have decreased heart rate and blood pressure, we have increased secretion of salivary and digestive glands. Okay, we start digesting our food, extracting all the nutrients from our food. Okay, we increase motility or movement in the digestive tract and blood flow to the digestive tract, so we can break the food down effectively and absorb the nutrients we need. And then we also have stimulation of urination and defecation. Okay, so we activate our digestive tract and shut down like blood flow and heart rate to the, shut down blood flow to skeletal muscles, decrease heart rate and respiration because we're focusing on our body being calm and digesting food, getting nutrients out of the food we eat. Okay. So those are the two main divisions. We should stay most of the time in parasympathetic so our body functions better. Okay, that's where we have better immune system, better digestion. Our body's going to get stressed out too much if we have sympathetic division all the time. This is a short-term emergency response. Okay. But we'll talk about sympathetic and parasympathetics. So first is the sympathetics. Okay, with the sympathetics, we have shorter preganglionic fibers in thoracic and lumbar. Remember, this is where we had the lateral horn in the spinal cord, is in this thoracics from T1 to L2. Okay, that's where the visceral motor was in the lateral horn. Okay, so we have information from the lateral horn coming from the spinal cord, and we have it coming out to these different ganglia, okay, that are real close to the spine. Okay, so we have short preganglionic fibers here, and then long postganglionic fibers. Okay, so up here is their cervical ganglion, and then we have their in your abdominal pelvic cavity, we have the splanchnic nerves, which lead to the celiac ganglion, the superior mesenteric ganglion, and inferior mesenteric ganglion. Okay, and that's sympathetic innervation to digestive tract, urinary tract, reproductive organs, that kind of stuff. Okay, so it goes from our lateral horn to the spinal anterior roots, to the white rami communicans, to the preganglionic fibers, to the sympathetic ganglion. Okay, this is these ganglion here that are along the spine. It's called your sympathetic chain ganglion because it's all linked up like a chain. Okay. And then from that ganglion, it goes to the effector organ. Okay, so here is a summary of that. We have the sympathetic chain ganglion, the paravertebral ganglia, which lie on either side of the vertebral canal. Okay, so this is it here. Okay, so it controls effectors in the body wall, thoracic cavity, head, neck, and limbs. Okay, that's part of our sympathetic cervical ganglion there. Is part of that, and that goes up and affects things in our head, neck, or limbs, that kind of stuff. So that affects higher up. Then we have collateral ganglion or prevertebral ganglion. So these are the ones that are anterior to the vertebral column. This is your innervation of the abdominal pelvic tissue. So the ones I just mentioned, the celiac ganglion, the superior mesenteric ganglion, and the inferior mesenteric ganglion. Those are the collateral ganglion, which help innervate your abdominal pelvic cavity and your viscera. Okay, so we have splanchnic nerves that exit the spinal cord and synapse at these ganglion. Okay, so celiac ganglion is the most superior of them, so it's going to innervate the more superior organs: stomach, liver, gallbladder, pancreas, and spleen. Superior mesenteric is kind of in the middle. Okay, it's going to innervate small intestine and most of the large intestine. Then inferior mesenteric is inferior to the bottom, so it innervates kidney, urinary bladder, terminal segments of the large intestine, as well as your sexual organs. So that's the sympathetic input from the spine. You also have one more that is a little bit different, the adrenal medulla. The adrenal medulla is the center of the adrenal gland, okay? But with this one, you have a long preganglionic fiber, okay? You have the fiber that exits the spine, goes to that, goes through the ganglion there, but it all comes all the way down to the actual medulla. So it synapses at the effector organ. Okay, so you have a shorter postganglionic or shorter ganglionic neuron right to the center of the adrenal gland. Okay? And this is where we release epinephrine and norepinephrine into the bloodstream. Okay? And so this is going to affect you systemically. And we'll talk about epinephrine and norepinephrine and what happens with the neurotransmitters here in a bit. Okay, so the preganglionic fibers release acetylcholine. So with the sympathetic nervous system, you have those preganglionic fibers that go to the ganglion, and at that ganglion, it releases acetylcholine. So these are cholinergic receptors here. Then the postganglionic neuron goes to the effector organ. And then at the effector organ, you have this spreading out network of telodendria, okay, that are called varicosities. These varicosities are little network of different vesicles. Okay, so it has different norepinephrine and epinephrine in these little vesicles that are all across the effector organ. So this one shows smooth muscles, and these varicosities spread out all over the smooth muscles. Okay, So norepinephrine is typically longer acting than acetylcholine. So there's acetylcholinesterase breaks down acetylcholine. So that's all over the body. So you can break it down pretty quickly. It just doesn't stay around um, to have a long-lasting effect. And norepinephrine is broken down by MAO and COMT. And so there's not a lot in most of the body's tissues, and there's none in the bloodstream. So when you have a release into the bloodstream and it goes out through the body and to an effector organ, it remains there for a lot longer. Okay, so it can have elevated levels for 30 seconds or so, and have several minutes of effect, as opposed to something shorter acting like acetylcholine. Okay, so we're going to talk about adrenergic receptors. So receptors for norepinephrine and epinephrine are called adrenergic receptors. Okay, so you have alpha and beta receptors. Norepinephrine is mainly stimulates alpha receptors, and then epinephrine can stimulate both alpha and beta. Both of these are G-coupled protein receptors. We've talked about many different types of G protein coupled receptors. So we'll start with alpha. There's alpha 1 and alpha 2, and then there's beta 1, 2, and 3. So alpha 1 is more common. It's found in smooth muscles, and these alpha 1 receptors excite the cell. Okay, it helps release calcium ions within the cell and stimulates the cell. So smooth muscles constrict, and blood vessels and sphincters. Okay, so when you want to constrict blood flow somewhere, like say the digestive tract, okay, you're going to use these alpha 1 receptors to constrict blood vessels to reduce the blood flow when you're in a sympathetic state. Okay. Alpha 2 is a little less common, but this is found in preganglionic sympathetic neurons, and it causes a decrease in the cyclic AMP. Okay, when you decrease cyclic AMP, you inhibit the cell. So this has a balancing effect for the sympathetic and parasympathetic activity. Okay, so when you start to decrease, you start to inhibit those cells, then you have less sympathetic activity. Okay, so it's more balancing. So that's the alpha receptors. Beta receptors are located in the plasma membrane of the cells of different organs, and it causes an increase in cyclic AMP. Okay, so this has the opposite effect of the alpha 2. Okay, alpha 2 inhibits cyclic AMP. The beta receptors increase cyclic AMP, so it increases metabolic activity. So with beta 1, you increase metabolic activity of cells and organs. With beta 2, you trigger relaxation of smooth muscles. So like in the respiratory tract, when you're trying to breathe in more oxygen, you need that dilation. So you need relaxation of those muscles, so you breathe in more oxygen. So beta 2 relaxes smooth muscles. And then beta 3 is found in adipocytes. So this helps to get more fatty acids into the bloodstream, so you have more energy reserve to utilize when you're in the sympathetic state. So those are alpha 1 and 2 and beta 1, 2, 3. There's going to be a question on one of those. So you got to know what each of those do in the body. Okay, so the effects of sympathetic stimulation. So acetylcholine causes vasodilation. So where is there vasodilation? In skeletal muscles. And so that's where we see the effect. We have more blood flow to skeletal muscles when we're in the sympathetic state. So acetylcholine vasodilates at the skeletal muscle and increases blood flow at the skeletal muscle. Okay, norepinephrine vasoconstricts. Okay, so where do we not want blood flow when we're in a sympathetic state? In our digestive tract. So norepinephrine causes vasoconstriction, decreased blood flow to other organs in the viscera. And then we also have nitric oxide. Nitric oxide causes vasodilation in the brain and skeletal muscles as well. All right. So let's talk about parasympathetics for a little bit. Parasympathetics, we have the opposite. We have long preganglionic fibers and short postganglionic fibers. Okay, so we see that in the cervical, in the cranial nerves, go to these different ganglion here. We have 3, 7, and 9. that innervate into these different ganglion. There's 4 different ganglion. Okay, the pterygopalatine, which goes to the lacrimal gland, okay, the ciliary ganglion, which goes to the eye, the submandibular ganglion, and the otic ganglion, which go to the different salivary glands. Okay? So parasympathetic influences function of these end organs. Then you also have cranial nerve 10. We've talked about cranial nerve 10 a lot. The vagus nerve innervates everything from the throat down, basically into all the way into the parts of the large intestine. So this is 75% of parasympathetic outflow to the viscera from the neck, thoracic, abdominal, pelvic cavities. Okay, and then at the end you have these sacral segments, so the pelvic nerves, S2, 3, and 4. Those go and innervate the kidneys, the lower digestive tract here, and the bladder, reproductive organs as well. Okay. Parasympathetic receptors are cholinergic. So we'll see in a second a little comparison of that. So cholinergic receptors include nicotinic receptors. Okay, nicotinic receptors occur in ganglion cells of both parasympathetic and sympathetic divisions, but it opens sodium channels in postsynaptic membranes, and it causes excitation of the cell. Then we also have muscarinic receptors. These occur at cholinergic neuromuscular and neuroglandular junctions. Okay, these are G-couple proteins again, or G-protein couple receptors again, and these have kind of a longer lasting effect, but they can excite or inhibit the cell. Okay, so those are the 2 different cholinergic receptors in the body. And we have a little chart here comparing all of the different receptors. Adrenergic receptors, again, adrenergic is epinephrine and norepinephrine. Cholinergic is acetylcholine. Okay, so nicotinic and muscarinic. And then it shows the response and the mechanism of how it works. Okay, so you can look that over a little bit. You need to be familiar with kind of what those do. And so here we see a little comparison of the parasympathetic and sympathetic divisions. Okay, so we see the parasympathetic with that long preganglionic fiber and releasing acetylcholine onto the postganglionic fiber, postganglionic neuron. Okay, and that postganglionic neuron is either in a ganglion that's close to the effector organ or in the effector organ, and then that releases, again, acetylcholine onto the effector organ neuromuscular junction or neuroglandular junction here to release acetylcholine. The arrows, different color arrows here are acetylcholine, norepinephrine, epinephrine. Okay, sympathetic division, you can see that there's that short preganglionic neuron and that long postganglionic neuron. So we see the preganglionic neuron releases that acetylcholine, and then at the end it releases norepinephrine. The difference here, this is that adrenal medulla that's just trying to show. Okay, we have a long preganglionic fiber and a real short postganglionic fiber to the adrenal medulla, which then releases norepinephrine and epinephrine into the circulatory system. So that's what you're seeing on that. Okay, so check out this chart. Kind of compares them. See, we have the innervation is that lateral horn of T1 to L2. Yeah, that's the only place that lateral horn is in the central nervous system. With parasympathetics, we have brain stem, okay, those cranial nerves, and the vagus nerve, okay, and then the sacral segments, S2 through 4. Okay. So look over that so you can understand the comparison between each of those. So in the body, we see that there's something called dual innervation. This is where we have parasympathetic fibers and sympathetic fibers innervating the same organ, okay, or the same area. Okay, so this is called dual innervation. We have sympathetic and parasympathetic affecting different organs. Now, some innervation, like to the lacrimal gland, we don't have sympathetic innervation there. So it's going to be a little bit different. With that doesn't have a dual innervation. It has just the parasympathetic innervation. But for a lot of the viscera, we see combined dual innervation. So with the head, we have the parasympathetic fibers from the ganglion, the ciliary, the pterygopalatine, the submandibular, and the otic, which we just looked at. And those are all cranial nerves. They go to the salivary glands, lacrimal glands, the eye. The sympathetic innervation of the head and neck is from that cervical ganglion, superior cervical ganglion. Okay. With the thoracic, we have basically we have vagus nerve from the parasympathetics. Okay, that innervates again from basically the neck down to the most of the small intestine or large intestine. Okay, so with the thoracic, we have the vagus nerve as a parasympathetic influence, and then we have different plexuses like cardiac plexus, pulmonary plexus, esophageal plexus, all in the thoracic cavity. That's a network of sympathetic postganglionic fibers. And then as we move into the abdominal pelvic cavity, we talked about the different ganglion and the sympathetics, that celiac, the superior mesenteric and inferior mesenteric are all those ganglion that innervate the abdominal pelvic area. You have the pelvic sympathetic chain as well that innervates that. With most of the abdominal cavity here, you also have vagus nerve innervating it for the parasympathetics, but then you also have those sacral segments, the S2, 3, 4, as part of the innervation for the parasympathetics to the pelvic area, the reproductive system, the lower digestive tract, the end of the large intestine, kidneys, that kind of thing. So those, that dual innervation, that's activation of parasympathetics, sympathetics, okay, the resting level of activation of both of those leads to your autonomic tone. Okay, so you can have a tone that's higher sympathetics or more parasympathetic. It's better to be more in a lower autonomic tone where you have parasympathetic activity through most of your body. You're not constantly kicking out adrenal hormones and things like that, or epinephrine, stressing your body out. Okay, you shouldn't be in an emergency state all the time. So your autonomic tone should be fairly low, but it is a combination of that sympathetic input, that parasympathetic input, this dual innervation determines that autonomic tone. Okay, so well, it's a little blurry, but there's charts in your book like this that has sympathetic effects and parasympathetics for all the different areas in your body. Okay, so like your eye, you dilate your pupils with sympathetics. Okay, so you can see better acute vision. Whereas parasympathetics, it constricts. Lacrimal gland, again, no innervation from parasympathetics, but no innervation from sympathetics, but parasympathetics have caused secretion at the lacrimal glands. And the opposite is true with these sweat glands and erector pili muscles. Okay, you have sympathetic effects. Okay, you start to sweat because of sympathetic input, and you start to have your hair and your skin starts to stand up when you have sympathetic activation, but these are not innervated by parasympathetics. They have no effect on that. So it's either increased or decreased sympathetic effects that cause these to react. Okay, so you can look through the rest of this chart just to get like a better idea of the differences and different innervations of the dual innervations of the sympathetic and parasympathetics. Okay, it goes through the next one to the respiratory tract, skeletal muscles, adipose tissue. Okay, again, you're releasing adipose tissue to get more energy reserves moved into your bloodstream so you can utilize them, whereas parasympathetics they're not going to innervate adipose tissue. It's not going to, you don't need extra reserves of energy in parasympathetic state. So you have no innervation there. When you look through it, it kind of makes sense how things are structured there. So we'll go through the visceral reflexes real quick. It's similar to somatic reflexes. Okay, you have that afferent sensory fiber that goes into the spinal cord, and then you have the intraneuron. Okay, and then that kicks out to the autonomic, the pre-ganglionic autonomic neuron, which goes to the ganglion, and then postganglionic fiber to the response. Okay, this typical reflex arc This one is called a long arc because it goes to the central nervous system. You do have short arcs, that bypass the central nervous system. It doesn't go back into the spinal cord. It just goes straight to the the autonomic ganglion. So it just goes to the autonomic ganglion and has that interneuron, which it synapses with, and that synapses with the postganglionic fiber and has that response. So you have a long reflex and a short reflex in the viscera. And then this, so it shows you some of the different visceral reflexes. Okay. So you have pupillary reflex, low light, you react, you dilate your pupils. Okay. Different reflexes that you can look through here. Comparison of the autonomic nervous system and somatic nervous system. We talked a little bit at the beginning about this. So autonomics affects your viscera, affects your cardiac muscle, smooth muscle, your glands, and then somatic nervous system affects skeletal muscles. The autonomic nervous system is mainly headquartered in your hypothalamus. Okay, I've said that for several classes of hypothalamus is where your autonomics is controlled. Hypothalamus for autonomics, and then cerebral cortex, this is your conscious awareness of and instruction of motor movement. So there's look through some of the differences there, you get a better handle on the differences between autonomics and somatic. So now we'll talk about a little bit about higher functioning and memory. So the higher functioning is in your cerebral cortex. Okay, it involves conscious and unconscious information, and it can it's subject to adjustments over time. Okay, so they can change. Okay, they're not innate, fixed reflexes, but they're learned and they can change. Okay, so some memory is stored bits of information gathered through experience. So we had fact memory. So this is like, a stop sign is red. Different just facts. Then you have skill memory. This is learned behaviors. So if you're trying to, do a backflip, like this is a skill of like learning how to do it, learning what muscles to activate and things like that. You learn the skill on how to do it. And then you remember, this is how I do it. So that's a skill memory. It's something you learn motor behaviors versus fact. It's just bits of information. Let's see, short-term memories don't last very long, but they can be recalled fairly quickly. And then long-term memories are, again, longer, but they can be harder to recall. So you have two types. You have secondary memories, which are long-term memories that fade over time. And so those can be, the further away you are from that original memory, the harder it can be to actually recall. And then the tertiary memories, these are memories you have with you for a lifetime. Okay, so these don't fade through time from the experience. Okay. All right, memory consolidation. This is where we take short-term and move it to long-term memory. Okay, so some of it is unclear on how this actually occurs, but you have the amygdaloid body, amygdala, and the hippocampus as the main portions that do this. You also have the nucleus basalis, which kind of links. So nucleus basalis is in diencephalon, and it has fibers that links the hippocampus, the amygdala, and the cerebral cortex. And the cerebral cortex is where most long-term memory is stored. So nucleus basalis is seen to have some role in connecting those areas of the brain and forming a long-term memory from the short-term memory. With memories, when you're forming them, you have increased neurotransmitter release, increased facilitation in the synapses, formation of more synapses. So it lays down a stronger neural connection, a stronger neural circuit. Okay, it's fired and stimulated more easily. The more easily it's stimulated, the better the memory is going to be. Okay, a memory engram is a single circuit, corresponds to a single memory, and so the conversion of short-term memory into a memory engram takes time, and it's dependent on the nature and the intensity and the frequency of these stimuli. Okay, so if it's super intense and it lasts for a while, then you're going to develop that engram quicker than if it was less intense over shorter periods of time. You're not really going to instill that single circuit to that single memory. The hippocampus plays a role in consolidating the memories by using NMDA receptors, which opens calcium ions and stimulated by glutamate. So that's how that works in memory formation. Okay, so a little bit about stage of consciousness. Consciousness is the awareness of and attention to external stimuli. So this can be from sleep. You can have nearly asleep to wide awake and high strung. And then you have unconscious, which is from deep sleep to a more lighter, drifty sleep. There's some EEGs. In this picture here, it shows your deep sleep. Okay, this is your non-REM sleep, and this is where your whole body is relaxed, and where you have heart rate, blood pressure, respiratory rate decreasing by 30%. Okay, so your body is super calm and relaxed in this. And then you have your REM sleep, rapid eye movement sleep, and this is where you have more active dreams. Blood pressure and respiratory rate can change through this, and then you can see your awake state there. So when we're talking about consciousness, we need to talk about reticular activating system. I mentioned this a little bit when we were talking about the medulla, because that's where it starts here in the medulla. Okay, but you can see it kind of goes throughout the brainstem here, but it starts in the medulla, and you have input from your senses, input from the general cranial and spinal nerves onto this area in the medulla, which then projects up into the cerebral cortex. So it does two different things. It helps you wake up from an unconscious state. Okay, so the more activation, so you hear your alarm go off on your phone, it means it's time to get up in the morning. That stimulates these, your auditory sense, which stimulates the reticular activating system enough to then spread out to the cortex and make you consciously aware of what's going on. Okay, but then, so it actually wakes your brain up, wakes your body up, but it also directs attention. So if you were to have, a loud noise in the corner of the room, your body brings the attention to that specific thing. Or if, most people can sit there and not notice they have a shirt pressing against all aspects of their, arms and, thoracics. But, if you have an itchy tag, then you notice, like, you have your shirt on and there's an itchy tag, like it's that you have that input from the spinal nerves into that activating system to bring your awareness to certain things. Okay, so that's the reticular activating system. And then neurotransmitters and behavior. So I talked a little bit about in this chapter how you have different neurotransmitters, and then if you have too little or too much, what kind of happens. And then it goes into a little bit about age-related nervous system changes. So with serotonin, this affects emotional states. And so too little of it can cause depression. Too much of it, though, can cause hallucinations. Norepinephrine, you increase it, it can cause exhilaration, or too little of it can cause depression. Dopamine, too little of this, that's what happens with Parkinson's. Okay, so you lose motor control, start to have motor problems, and then you can also, too much of it can cause schizophrenia. Okay, age-related stuff, you have Huntington's disease. So this isn't really age-related, this happens younger, like 40s. But for some reason, there's destruction of acetylcholine and GABA secreting neurons in the basal nuclei. So again, basal nuclei controls motor movements and muscle tone. So you're gonna develop problems with muscle tone and controlling movements, and you have an intellectual decline as well from this. More age-related stuff, you reduce brain size and weight, reduce blood flow, reduce synapses. You develop different things in the brain. So lipofuscin, which is a granular pigment. You have neurofibrillary tangles, which develop in the brain. You have plaques. One of those is an amyloid plaque, which that's what leads to Alzheimer's. So all of those can affect how the cells actually function, or like it can affect the myelination, or how the dendrites communicate and the synapses and things like that. So all of these that develop then start to decrease proper neural functioning. Then you can have senile dementia. Okay, this is because of age. So you have these degenerative changes, loss of memory, emotional disturbances, things like that. And then Alzheimer's is the most common and disabling of all the senile dementias. Okay, you start losing your memory, you regress into not being able to do certain things, which is pretty hard to watch. But that's it for this is just how we integrate different things in the body, different systems, endocrine, cardiac, muscular, different things. So these are in your books as well. But so that's it for sympathetics and parasympathetics. So this is a poster that I have in my office that shows where you get innervation from. So this is a good dual innervation kind of poster. Okay, you see the green. This is parasympathetic is the green. So see you have these ciliary ganglion, the pterygopalatine, the submandibular, the otic ganglion here, and then the yellow is a sympathetic, so cervical sympathetic ganglion, the different splanchnic nerves, and the ganglion here, inferior, superior celiac ganglion. So it shows where these go. And then again, this big one that goes all throughout here, that's the vagus, okay, vagus nerve. So this is a good one for the dual innervation. It shows you where the parasympathetic is located, brainstem, upper cervical, and sacral here. This is why, you ever heard of craniosacral therapy? Okay, it helps to activate these craniosacral areas in the body to activate your parasympathetics. And then you have your sympathetic through your thoracics and lumbar here. So I thought that might be useful visual too. So that's it for the autonomic nervous system. We have one more lecture on the nervous system, and then I'll do a video on the review for the exam. Okay.